Max Verstappen has just detonated a shocking revelation after the FIA disqualified both McLarens in Las Vegas for microscopic floor violations that turned the entire championship upside down. New evidence shows that their skid blocks were worn beyond the legal limit by measurements so precise they changed the standings in a matter of minutes and handed Verstappen the biggest opportunity of the season. The ruling ignited a storm inside the paddock, and Verstappen responded with a bombshell message aimed directly at the FIA as he left Las Vegas believing the title fight had been reborn. And before we dive into the full story, make sure you subscribe so you do not miss the next chapter of this championship that is about to explode in the final two races. The Las Vegas Grand Prix transformed overnight when the FIA released the inspection results for both McLarens and found that their skid blocks had worn beyond the legal limit. The plank is one of the most regulated components in Formula One because it defines how low a car may run, and the document shows that the measurements taken from the McLaren chassis fell below the minimum thickness of 9 mm. These numbers were recorded with an accuracy of 1/1000th of a millimeter, meaning they were far beyond the margin for doubt. This was not a matter of interpretation. It was a clear violation, and the FIA acted with the same rigidity it has applied to every team since the rule was created. As the checks continued, the situation only grew more dramatic. The readings on Piastri's car included a measurement of 8.74 mm while Norris showed 8.88. Both numbers sat beneath the threshold that defines legality. According to the protocol, whenever a skid block is found below the mandated thickness, the penalty is automatic disqualification. There is no allowance for intent, damage, or circumstances. The FIA repeated the measurements in the presence of McLaren representatives and confirmed the result without variation. Moments later, both McLaren entries were excluded from the final classification. The impact of this decision rippled through Las Vegas instantly. Before the ruling, McLaren believed they were leaving with a valuable haul of points, including a podium challenge from Norris. After the disqualification, the team lost every one of those points and the championship standings were rewritten. This meant that drivers who had finished behind the McLarens moved up the order, and the overall narrative of the title fight shifted dramatically. The ruling was not simply a technical correction. It was an earthquake that changed the landscape of the season just as the final two races approached. In the midst of this chaos, one man benefited more than any other. Max Verstappen had already taken victory on track through a controlled and disciplined performance, but the disqualification of the McLarens transformed that win from an important result into a decisive blow in the championship. His win was suddenly paired with a major setback for two of his strongest rivals, creating a shift in momentum that no one expected. The document does not analyze his race, but the effect of the ruling on the standings was immediate and undeniable. The FIA document also recorded McLaren's explanation. They argued that the wear may have been caused by unexpected porpoising, limited practice running, and the possibility of floor damage from early race contact. These points were acknowledged but ultimately dismissed because the regulation allows no exceptions. The plank measurement rule is absolute. It exists to prevent teams from running the car too low for aerodynamic gain. Once the result is recorded, the consequence is predefined. McLaren's attempt to explain the cause did not change the fact that the data placed both cars outside the permitted range. As the paddock absorbed the shock, Verstappen's position strengthened. The ruling eliminated key points from his closest competitors and narrowed the gap in the standings heading into the decisive races in Qatar and Abu Dhabi. What had begun as a straightforward victory had turned into a moment that reshaped the entire championship. Verstappen left Las Vegas with more than a trophy. He left with a transformed opportunity at claiming the world title, fueled by data so precise and irrefutable that the FIA had no choice but to enforce the strictest penalty in the rulebook. The technical implications of the McLaren disqualification extend far beyond the surface-level reading of a worn skid block. The FIA document makes clear that the minimum plank thickness is a cornerstone regulation because it controls ride height, prevents extreme low running, and ensures aerodynamic fairness. When the measurements on the McLaren chassis returned values below 9 mm, the conclusion was immediate. The car had been operating at a height that provided aerodynamic advantages not permitted by the rulebook. Even if the team argued this was unintentional, the FIA applies the regulation with zero flexibility. The readings on Piastri and Norris were taken multiple times, in controlled conditions, with the team present, and the results remained identical. McLaren attempted to defend themselves by presenting several potential causes for the wear. They cited unexpected porpoising that increased floor contact, reduced practice running due to weather that limited their setup refinement, and the possibility of earlier race contact that may have damaged the plank. These explanations were included in the official report, yet the FIA could not accept any of them as mitigating factors. The regulation does not consider cause, intent or circumstance. It only considers compliance. If the plank falls outside the mandated thickness, the penalty is applied without discussion. This absolute nature of the rule made the disqualification inevitable the moment the initial measurement was recorded. This rigidity is why Verstappen felt emboldened to criticize the FIA in the aftermath of the ruling. He acknowledged the rule but questioned the broader consequences of a sport in which a fraction of a millimeter could determine the outcome of a championship. His frustration stemmed from the belief that teams push the limits because the regulations encourage it, yet the same regulations punish them severely when the margin is crossed by the smallest amount. Verstappen argued that such microscopic thresholds place teams in a position where the slightest miscalculation carries disproportionate consequences. His comments reflected a tension that has existed in Formula One for decades between innovation and regulation. The controversy also placed additional pressure on the FIA to explain the precision of its methodology. The report emphasizes that the measuring equipment used in post-race inspections can record values with an accuracy of 1/1000th of a millimeter. This level of technological exactness is necessary to enforce strict technical rules, but it also highlights how narrow the margins are for teams. In the case of Norris and Piastri, the recorded values of 8.88 and 8.74 appeared tiny, yet they represented a meaningful aerodynamic deviation. The FIA must maintain complete consistency with these checks or risk accusations of selective enforcement, which is why the governing body stood firmly by its findings. The ruling also created enormous competitive consequences. According to the document, Norris would have carried a lead of more than 40 points into the final 2 rounds, while Piastri would have remained firmly in contention with a matching 24-point margin behind his teammate. Instead, both drivers were reset to 24 points behind Verstappen, placing all 3 contenders within striking distance of one another. What had been a championship with a clear favorite suddenly transformed into a 3-way battle shaped by a technical infraction rather than pure racing performance. This created renewed urgency for every team involved because the margin for error in the remaining rounds had disappeared completely. For Verstappen, the ruling created not only opportunity but pressure. He left Las Vegas with 2 victories in the last 3 races and the standings unexpectedly aligned in his favor. The FIA decision effectively erased the cushion McLaren believed they held and forced Norris and Piastri into a title fight they had not been preparing for mentally. Verstappen understood that the momentum had shifted, but he also recognized that the disqualification placed him under greater scrutiny. A title regained through another team's penalty carries an added psychological weight, and Verstappen's strong words toward the FIA reflected this tension. He knew the ruling gave him a path forward, but it also made every decision in the next 2 Grand Prix weekends even more consequential. The championship picture changed in an instant when the FIA confirmed the disqualification of both Norris and Piastri. Before the ruling, Norris stood in a commanding position with a margin that would have allowed him to manage the final 2 races with caution rather than aggression. The document shows that he would have left Las Vegas with a lead of more than 40 points over Verstappen, a gap large enough to absorb a mistake without losing control of the standings. But once the skid block measurements were declared illegal, the entire structure of the championship collapsed beneath him. The deficit that separated the contenders evaporated and the balance of power shifted completely. This reversal placed Piastri in an equally vulnerable position. He had finished the race believing he had gained ground on Verstappen and was ready to mount a late-season attack for the title. Instead, the ruling pulled him back into a level scoring position with only 24 points separating him from the lead. The report highlights this symmetry. Both McLaren drivers entered Las Vegas with clear advantages and both left the city with the same 24-point deficit. The drama came not only from the loss of points but from the psychological shock of realizing that a mechanical detail smaller than a grain of sand had undone an entire weekend of performance and preparation. The consequences for Verstappen were immediate and profound. Instead of leaving Las Vegas needing a miracle in the final 2 rounds, he walked away with a realistic path back into the title fight. The document shows that he had already won 2 of the last 3 races, which meant that his momentum was building before the disqualification. Now with Norris and Piastri losing their points, the standings pulled Verstappen forward into a position of genuine contention. He did not need other teams to collapse anymore. He needed only a strong finish to the season. What had been a nearly impossible mathematical challenge suddenly became an achievable mission. The dramatic twist in Las Vegas also reshaped how each team approached the remaining rounds. McLaren had planned to manage the championship through controlled strategic decisions, but the ruling forced them into a fight they had not anticipated. The FIA's findings, confirmed to the thousandth of a millimeter, placed both drivers back into a situation where every lap, every pit stop and every tire call carried championship-level weight. This sudden shift created a psychological strain that no driver welcomes with only 2 races left. Norris and Piastri went from defending a lead to chasing a rival with championship-winning experience and momentum. Verstappen understood that the dynamic had changed. He recognized that the FIA decision did not simply move him closer in the standings, it reframed the final 2 races as a direct confrontation between 3 contenders with almost identical mathematical scenarios. The psychological advantage now rested with him. His win in Las Vegas had already demonstrated his ability to control a race, and the disqualification meant he could attack the final rounds with renewed confidence. The document does not delve into strategic forecasts, but the implication is unmistakable. Verstappen gained more than points. He gained leverage, momentum, and control of the narrative.